So let's talk about meditation. Have you ever wondered if it really changes you, or is it just, a temporary fix? Well, that's the exact question Daniel Goleman and Richard Davidson get into in their incredible book, Altered Treats. Today, we're going to dive deep into the science they've uncovered, looking at how this ancient practice can actually create real, lasting change, not just in our minds, but in our brains, too. And this quote right here, it gets straight to the heart of their entire argument. They draw this really important line in the sand between two ideas. On one side, you've got that temporary feeling of calm. They call that a state. But on the other side, you have a fundamental, lasting shift in who you are. That's an altered trait. And let me tell you, understanding that difference is the key to everything else we're going to talk about. So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll go from buzzword to biology. Then we'll get into how the brain is literally sculpted by meditation. After that, we'll look at resilience and compassion, the importance of insight and guidance, and then the need for real scientific rigor. And finally, we'll wrap it all up with the big idea, the enduring trait. All right, let's kick things off with our first section, from buzzword to biology. This is where we start to peel back the layers and separate what you see in pop culture from what the actual science says. I mean, you've seen it everywhere, right? Meditation apps on your phone, weekend workshops, those corporate wellness programs. Goleman and Davidson argue that, yeah, this stuff is super popular, but this whole wave of mindfulness often completely misses the point. It just gets lost in all the hype, and the real science gets buried. So what's their answer to all this hype? Well, they're pretty clear about it. If you're looking for real, lasting change, a 10-minute ab session isn't going to cut it. What you need is systematic, intensive training that's actually backed by rigorous measurement. I love how they put it. It's about training, not just trying. And this brings us right back to that huge distinction they make between states and traits. Think of it like this. A state is a fleeting experience, that nice moment of peace you feel after a quick meditation. But a trait? That's a stable, enduring quality that actually becomes part of who you are. It gets woven right into your neural wiring. This slide just illustrates the difference perfectly. So on one hand, you've got the busy executive who uses an app for a quick 10-minute calm down. That's a state, it's temporary. But then, on the other hand, you have the monastic practitioner whose baseline anxiety is just lower, even when life gets super stressful. That, my friends, is a trait. And the book's whole argument is that it's only that high-dosage, serious practice that can move you from being the executive to being the practitioner. Okay, let's keep building on this. We're moving into our second section, sculpting the meditative brain. And this is where things get really fascinating, because we're going to look at the hard evidence, the science that shows how this practice physically changes our brains. This right here, this was a groundbreaking moment. We're talking about the late 90s, when Richard Davidson did these EEG studies on Tibetan monks. And what he found was just incredible. These monks could intentionally generate what are called high-frequency gamma waves. Now, these aren't just any brainwaves. They're linked to heightened awareness, to integrating all your thoughts. This wasn't just them chilling out. It was a clear sign their brains were operating on a whole different level. It was really the first piece of hard evidence that something truly profound was going on. And after that initial discovery, the research just exploded. Suddenly, we had MRI studies showing that long-term meditators literally had thicker gray matter in parts of the brain links to attention and self-awareness. Get this, even beginners started showing changes in their hippocampus, which is crucial for memory and emotion, after only 8 weeks. And so importantly, these studies showed stronger connections between the emotional parts of our brain and the part that makes decisions, the prefrontal cortex. I love how the authors say it. This isn't just a mental exercise. It is a physical renovation project for your brain. Okay, so the brain physically changes. That's amazing. But what does that actually mean for our day-to-day lives? Well, that brings us to our third section, resilience and compassion. This is where we see how those brain changes help us handle our emotions and connect better with other people. So what does this actually look like in practice? Check this out. In one study, after just 3 months of practice, novices, people new to this, showed a nearly 20% drop in the reactivity of their amygdala. The amygdala is basically the brain's fight-or-flight alarm system. So in simple terms, meditation helps you turn down the volume on that internal alarm. But look, this kind of emotional balance isn't something that happens overnight. The science is really clear that it's a gradual compounding process. You see it week by week. Stress hormones like cortisol start to decrease. Your heart rate variability, which is a key sign of a healthy nervous system, gets better. And maybe the most relatable thing is that people just report getting stuck in those negative thought loops way less often. And this isn't just theoretical. It applies directly to high-stress jobs. They did a randomized trial with medical residents. I mean, can you think of a more stressful job? And an 8-week mindfulness program led to a 25% drop in how much stress they felt. That's a real, measurable boost in resilience right there. But it's not all about just managing our own stress. It's also about how we relate to other people. There was this fascinating study where participants went through 8 weeks of compassion training. Then they put them in this economic game. And the result was incredible. They gave away 40% more money to complete strangers than the people who didn't do the training. That's just powerful evidence that compassion isn't some fixed thing you're born with. It's something you can train, just like a muscle. So we've covered how meditation can impact our emotions. But what about our thoughts? That brings us right to section 4, insight, awareness, and guidance. This is where we're going to dig into the ability to just observe our own minds, and also why having the right support system is so crucial. Okay, this is a really cool finding. You know that part of your brain that's always on when you're just daydreaming or your mind is wandering off? Scientists have a name for it. It's the default mode network. Well, expert meditators showed a nearly 30% reduction in activity there. This is direct neural evidence that they've enhanced their ability to stay present and focused, to actually observe their thoughts without just getting swept away. But the book is really clear on this point. Developing these kinds of traits rarely ever happens in a vacuum. It's not something you just do alone with an app. They highlight 3 huge catalysts for real change. First, having an experienced teacher who can give you tailored guidance. Second, going on immersive retreats to get that deep, focused practice. And third, being part of a community that gives you support and reinforcement along the way. All right, this brings us to a really important discussion in Section 5, science, rigor, and society. It's one thing to have all these findings, but how do we make sure the research is actually solid? And then, how do we apply it all responsibly out in the real world? Look, Goleman and Davidson are scientists first and foremost, and they make this really strong plea for a much higher standard in mindfulness research. They're talking about proper randomized controlled trials. They want to see studies that combine brain imaging with actual biological markers, and using modern tech like wearables to track exactly how much practice leads to what result. Their whole goal is to move this field away from just personal stories and into the world of hard, reproducible science. And once you have that solid science, the big question is, okay, how do we translate this into society? The book gets into some really cool real-world case studies, things like integrating mindfulness into school curricula to help kids with attention, or using it in these high-stress corporate environments to fight burnout, and even adding it to healthcare to help patients manage things like chronic pain and anxiety. And all of that brings us to our conclusion, the enduring trait. This is where we're going to tie all these threads together and really understand that journey from a fleeting moment of calm to real, lasting change. So what's the big takeaway here? Altered Traits makes this incredibly powerful case that meditation is so much more than just a way to feel good for a few minutes. It's a disciplined, rigorous training for your mind. It's a practice that can fundamentally reshape your brain structure and even change your emotional default settings. But, and this is a big but, the authors are crystal clear. This kind of deep change only happens when you approach the practice with depth, with rigor, and with support. And so the book leaves us with this really powerful question. It's a challenge, really. A challenge to move beyond just casually dabbling and to start approaching our inner lives with the same dedication, the same seriousness that we would bring to mastering any valuable craft. Because in the end, it's not about a quick fix. It's about a lifelong practice.